So, as you said, I'm from Three Rivers Park District, and more specifically, I work at Elm Creek Park Reserve at the Nature Center there, Eastman Nature Center. Elm Creek Park Reserve preserves over 5,200 acres of land. It's the largest park the Three Rivers Park District manages. And to give you an idea of the size, it's about the size of 5,200 football fields, or enough room for the Vikings to break our hearts 5,200 times. And so it's a very large park. And because of that, we have a lot of unique animals, a lot of great habitat, and some of the habitat we have is really ideal for fireflies. So for the past 5 or 6 years now, we've done firefly festivals, we've done firefly hikes, we've gone out and collected fireflies. So it's been a big part of what we do in the summer. I am also the one of the co-hosts of the Park District's podcast, The Wandering Naturalist. And so part of that is we did do a series on fireflies, and we were lucky enough to be able to interview one of the top firefly researchers in the world, which was really amazing. So I'm excited to share some of the things I've learned both from her and from our experience leading different firefly programs. Because fireflies are amazing creatures. They're really, as my PowerPoint presentation says, they're a light in the dark. They have lit up our imagination through countless centuries. When you think back to stories about fairies, fireflies really are an inspiration for them. They have lit up our ideas for medicine and food safety, which we'll talk about a little bit. And they're even lighting the way into the stars, trying to find alien life for NASA. And so there's a lot of amazing things they can do. And what I want to talk a little bit about today is just some of the really cool things that make fireflies special. Because the best way to conserve an animal is to get people to care about it. And to get people to care about it, you have to know about it. I also want to talk about some ways that people living at home or the city itself can use to help conserve fireflies, provide good habitat for them. And so my goal is to kind of talk to you all for roughly 30 minutes. Feel free to interrupt me with questions if you have any questions. And then we'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. If you want to go beyond that, that is your choice, but I want to respect your meeting time afterwards as well. So I'll let you know when that time is up, and then you all can make a decision about if you want more questions or not. But again, interrupt me if you have questions at any point. So, talking about fireflies, we call them fireflies in Minnesota. Where I grew up in South Florida, we call them lightning bugs. And it turns out South Florida is actually more correct. You don't get to say that about Florida very often, but lightning bug is a more specific term. So firefly talks about all the beetles in this family that's called lampridae, and that includes glowworms, which is a really popular little stuffed doll for kids. Those are more common in Europe, where you have the female who lights up but doesn't fly and the males don't. We do have at least one species of glowworm in the United States in the Appalachian Mountains. And then the ones that flash on and off like we have here, the more specific term for them is lightning bug. If you call them firefly, it's okay. You know, you call your duck duck goose game duck duck gray duck. So I mean, you're already doing things wrong. Why not call them firefly anyway? And so fireflies are neither a lightning bug, they're neither a bug or a fly, they are actually a beetle. And the reason why is if you look at the picture or the drawing I have on my slide, or if you're in the room and you look at one of the preserved fireflies, look at their back, you'll see they have a straight line going down their back. That straight line is made by their outer wings called the elytra. Those are more of a hard shell. And underneath are 2 more wings they fly with. So that's pretty characteristic of beetles. Now there's over 2,000 species of fireflies in the world. In North America, there's about 120 species, and in Minnesota, we're actually not sure. There hasn't been a lot of research done on our insects in Minnesota. Dragonflies, we're starting to get there. We're getting a better idea. Even dragonflies, we don't, it's certain spots in all the species we have, and those are really big. Fireflies, we're like, oh, it's a firefly, it's great. Turns out there's lots of species. We don't know quite how many in Minnesota. We think there's about 6 main groups of fireflies in Minnesota, but there may be more. But I'll talk a little bit more about those 6 main groups that we have. And we have found most of those groups in Elm Creek Park Reserve, which is just north of here. And so they're probably around this area as well. Now, to start off with fireflies, and start off with understanding how we can provide habitat for them, we have to know about their life cycle. Because if you're going to have fireflies, you have to have habitat for every single part of their life cycle. And so that starts with their eggs, which are laid in damp woods. You have to have woodland that is kind of moist and wet with a lot of rotting logs around it for fireflies who want to lay their eggs there. And that's because when they hatch, they turn into a larva. A larva is a young insect. It's a firefly larva, kind of like a caterpillar for a butterfly. And these larvae hunt through these damp woods and they go under rotten logs. And their primary food tends to be things like worms, roly-polies, slugs, snails, things like that.
So do the eggs glow?
The eggs glow. The larva glows, the pupa glows, and some of the adults glow.
Okay.
And so that is one of the things that makes fireflies is almost every life stage glows. I'll get into a little bit more about what we call our dark fireflies, where the adults don't. But yes, they glow and it's a warning. They're all poisonous.
Oh.
And so if you think about, some of our insects that are really famous for being poisonous, like monarchs, how do they tell us they're poisonous? They're bright color, they're orange. But that doesn't work during night. And these critters are out at night. And the reason it doesn't look at night is because we see color with what's called cones in our eyes. And cones are great at having crisp, clear images. They're great at picking up that color. They don't work when there's not a lot of light. So then we switch to our rods at night. And those are a little bit blurrier. They're good at seeing at the dim light, but they can't see any color. So when there's no light around, you can't see color. So these critters can be as bright as they want. They won't harm the predator. But a nice green flash will. And so when a predator gets near these eggs, they start glowing. I've actually never seen that, unfortunately. I've tried to find eggs, haven't found it yet. I have seen the larvae glow. We have seen them, they'll glow, and if they're disturbed, their abdomen starts flashing. And then for the first time last year, I saw the pupa glow. It was really amazing. I was leading one of our firefly hikes, and everything was a little delayed because we had a really cold spring last year. And so as we're walking through the woods, there was just these solid points of green lights on the ground. What is that? And so I hiked up to it, and there were the pupa, and they were just glowing. It was really, really neat. And in all those cases, they were all in woods that had a lot of leaves on the ground, trees that had fallen over, places we'd love to be more natural, because that provides them the food and the habitat and security they need. And then they'll become adults. Adults need a slightly different habitat. They prefer to have woods that's on the border of tall grass. And that gives them places to perch. Now, in Minnesota, as I said, we have at least 6 different firefly groups. And so you can see at the top, we've got Lucidota spa. Spa is just a fancy scientific way of saying it's some kind of species, we don't know what. So Lucidota is the genus name. We've got Pyropyga and Elychnia. Those are what we call dark fireflies. The adults have lost their ability to produce light. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. There's a couple of hypotheses that are really fascinating. But we do actually have these ones present. You'll see them more during the day. And they won't actually flash. Have you seen them before?
No, my friend was telling me that she was seeing fireflies during the day.
Yes, and I'll catch the glowing ones, the flashing ones in the bottom as well during the day. But the dark ones are a lot more common. You can tell the difference both from the photos, and then I've got a couple of the dark ones here if you want to look closer. You can notice our species on the bottom, the ones that have an F because they flash, they have yellow on their elytra, on those 2 hard upper wings. The dark ones don't have any yellow.
Now, can we close that shaft?
So if you catch a firefly and you look at it, a way you can tell it's a firefly is they have these big shields around their head that kind of have that little bit of yellow or pinkish. You can see they all have that. So that's a pretty good sign you've got a firefly. And then whether it flashes or not, look at the elytra, these upper wings with a straight line down the middle. If it's all black, then it's not going to flash as an adult. If it's got yellow, it will flash, at least in Minnesota. In terms of habitat, we talked about that a little bit. They love forest clearings that have big patches of tall grass or shrubs that the females can kind of perch on, places to rest with forest around it. They want moist forest around it for their eggs and their larvae and their pupa, because again, they need that moist soil to grow and develop. Stream edges are a good place for them to be found as well, or wetland edges, marsh edges, pond edges. Whenever we have a development that comes in and there's a pond there with tall grass, you won't have fireflies there for, probably decades, but eventually they might move into that spot. We'll talk about why it takes so long again in a little bit. At the edge of suburbs or even cities like around here, I see there's a lot of trees around your city hall, a lot of parks you have. Those will all be places where you could potentially find fireflies. The important thing is having lots of trees and having some moist soil.
How was a dry year like this back then?
Excellent question. And there's not necessarily a scientific answer to that. So there can be some anecdotal information. And some of that anecdotal information is that when we did our firefly hikes, we saw a lot less of our two common species, but we saw a lot more of our rare species. And so our two common species are what we normally think of. They've got the yellowish green and they flash or flash. The rare species actually has an orange amber flash. And I'd only ever seen it once before in my 6 years of doing firefly hikes. This year, I saw 50, 60 of them. Now, as to whether that's because of the drought or not, or could be that we had, all that moisture early in the spring that could have had an impact. It's really hard to put it down to one thing. Probably our best guess is that when it's drier, it has an impact on them because there's going to be less slugs and snails and roly-polies for them to eat, and so that'll impact their larvae. We're making assumptions about that. And the truth is, which have a much, much bigger impact on them is going to be the fact that the earth is just getting warmer in general and making weather more chaotic. And then lights at night and pesticide use are
They're extremely sensitive to glyphosate.
Yes,
I understand.
absolutely. When we talked on the podcast to several different firefly experts, when we asked them, well, what's the biggest threat to fireflies, lights at night and pesticide use is the thing that they all said. They kept repeating that. We didn't ask them to say that or anything. And they never talked to each other beforehand either. But those are the things that always came up. In terms of what they eat, like I said, for the larvae, they tend to eat snails and earthworms, roly-poly, soft-bodied creatures. How they eat them is really cool. They've got these kind of needle-like mandibles, they're called, that pinch in and grab their prey, and they're hollow, and they inject it full of digestive enzymes. So if they grab the snail is oftentimes bigger than the larva, and they'll grab onto the squishy part of the snail, and they'll inject it and turn it into a snail shake. They just inject the insides, and then they slurp it out. It's really, really cool.
That is.
Right? It's awesome.
Is the whole snail or just a small part?
They will eventually digest the entire inside of the snail. And so it's a pretty good meal for them when they get it. Yeah, it's not like they're out there eating 10 snails a night or 100 snails a night. One snail is probably good enough. But yeah, the skin stays and the hard part stays. The inside's all messed up. Some adults eat nectar. Most adults, as far as we can tell, don't eat it all. And so even though they have mouth parts, it does seem like a lot of adults will actually not eat. Their whole purpose is just to breathe. And so again, we think of the adult as being kind of the penultimate part of the life cycle, where we think of it being most of the time, because for humans that's true. For fireflies and most insects, it's really the larva is the main part of their life cycle, where they're eating and they're growing.
So do we know how long they stay adults?
As adults, it can be anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
As larvae, they might be larvae for 6 months.
Okay.
So the majority of their life is as a larva.
Darn, I wish I could go there.
Right? Wouldn't it be amazing?
Are they all native?
All the fireflies I know of are native. There may be at the very southern border of Minnesota. Some species might slowly be moving north as it's getting warmer, but fireflies move incredibly slowly. One of the things that makes it really hard to get fireflies back once you've built development or you've built a city or you've built something is they don't move. They stay where they are. So if you have this pond that's full of fireflies and then construction happens there and the fireflies get wiped out, you might not have another batch of fireflies move into that for 5 years, 10 years, even decades, because they just spread out.
Like depending on proximity of other fireflies.
Depending on proximity goes, if you've got one that's 100 yards away, sure, they'll move in there. But if usually the size of developments we're talking about, that's enough to kind of keep them from that area for a while. And it's not that developments are bad or we shouldn't be doing it, it's just they do have a long-term impact.
Will they abandon like a pond if, let's say, you're developing an area, they leave the pond and there were fireflies around the pond. Are they disturbed by the construction around them and will they abandon it?
That depends a little bit on how much the land is impacted and if there's still gonna be food in the area for their young. They're not gonna abandon it, they may not survive.
Okay.
You know, they're not gonna fly somewhere else. What would be the thing that would really impact them the most is if a lot of people start putting a lot of fertilizer,
Okay.
pesticides to their yards, and if they leave lights on at night. Because if lights are on at night, they can't see each other flashing.
Okay.
I asked about the native thing as well because, well, earthworms aren't.
Are not native, you're 100% correct.
Did that like boost their populations kind of? It's kind of like a bonus that just arrived out of nowhere.
So again, that's a really complicated question to answer. To clarify a little bit, you're correct that there are no native terrestrial species of earthworms. There is one native species of aquatic earthworm, which sounds like an oxymoron, but they're in the annelid family. And that's because, of course, the glaciers came through. When we look at other animals that rely on earthworms for food, like a woodcock, which is a bird, their populations have undoubtedly gone up because of earthworms. Now, if you factor in habitat loss and whatnot, I'm not quite sure
Probably.
if they're even, but it does move up. Salamanders are really famous for eating earthworms. There's a lot of evidence that because there's so much earthworms as food now, that's actually caused their populations to go down. And it's because the more they eat, the faster they grow. And so we end up with these older salamanders growing large enough, fast enough. They actually get big enough, they start eating their younger generation.
Oh, my
Oh,
goodness.
And then they end up missing out on some generations. So saying if earthworms are gonna bring populations up or not, I think it can be one or the other without studying, you can't say. And in terms of fireflies, I'd say that other factors limit them so much that earthworms wouldn't necessarily provide a big boost. It's more of alternative food source compared to what they would have eaten historically, because we would have had alternative foods that would have been much more common, but with earthworms destroying the habitats, those food sources like roly-polies and other stuff, but it's probably less common than they used to be historically.
It's very complicated.
Okay,
It is.
in jest, so what you're saying is earthworms are more nutritious.
I mean, I used to make earthworm cookies for students. If you want to eat them, go for it. You throw in some chocolate chips in there, it's not bad. Yeah,
Get
yeah.
the protein.
We gotta get rid of them somewhere. They probably, I'm glad you all know about this, but I would argue that earthworms are the second most destructive animal in Minnesota. And a lot of it has to do with them removing our duff layers, so plants can't grow. A lot of it has to do, the reason you have to fight buckthorn so much in your park is because of earthworms. Earthworms and buckthorn create a feedback cycle to support each other. If you didn't have earthworms, you wouldn't have nearly as much buckthorn. So they're an interesting critter. Now, when you watch them flying, if you see them in the air, those are almost always males. The males fly through the air. As adults, the main reason for them flashing is just to say to the females, look at me, I'm really cute, you should go out on a date. Or more scientifically, they're saying to say, I've got a lot of energy, I'm really healthy, any offspring we have are gonna have a great chance of survival. And the females, they have shorter wings, if they have wings, some species don't. They tend to be perched on grass or on shrubs or on the ground. So if you see a flash that's not moving, that's not flying, it's probably a female, and she is evaluating the males flying around. And they're able to actually judge the flashes down to microseconds. To judge, is the male flashing correctly? Is it bright enough? How does he look? And then if she flashes back, the male will fly down to her. The males aren't as picky because they don't have as much of an investment to give.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are there other beetles where the females don't have wings?
Yes.
Oh.
Yep, there's actually quite a few insects out there where the females have lost their wings. There's moths as well, if you've ever heard of bagworms. The females have lost their wings as well. It's a form of, it's called neonateny, where they keep their childhood or youthful traits like a caterpillar. There's other beetles that I couldn't give you specific species right off the top of my head. But it tends to be if the female has a way of attracting the male from a distance, there's not a lot of incentive for her to fly, so why waste energy flying or making wings? A lot of those other species use pheromones. And in the terms of moths, some moths can smell the pheromones of the female from 3 miles away. And so that'll draw the males in. Some females still fly in that case, but other species, the females don't.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Because flashing is really important for the males, they have bigger lanterns. So if you look on the bottom of our slides, the bottom right, The right side lantern is the yellow strips. That's the males. And the one on the left, if you're facing the screen, are the females. You can see how much smaller the females are. Because again, you just gotta say yes to the male. The male's the one who has to kind of show off, do the dance moves, do all the impressive stuff.
And he has to find her, right?
They generally are all in the same habitat, so he is flying in the air and he knows that she's watching. And they're just, the males are keeping for looking for that flash when female to fly at. And once they see that, they fly there. And sometimes it can be a little bit of a race to get to it.
Is that all similar to what's the bird thing where they all display, all the males displaying one spot?
Mating
Like
is
fairy
like-
chickens. Yeah, I think, I've never put that, that together, but I could see it as being like that, where the males are all in one place and it draws the females in. Absolutely. Yeah, because that is why you see the fireflies, they're all there in one area. So yeah. Now, what really fascinates me is how they glow. I'm actually wondering if it's possible to get the camera turned on briefly, because I did bring some stuff to demonstrate some of these things, but if it's too hard, it's okay. I can just do it for the folks in the boardroom. But how they glow, it's called biofluorescence, living light, and it's one of the most efficient light sources in terms of heat we know of. They put up pretty much no heat. And scientists have actually studied them to make more efficient LED light bulbs, because they can make light so efficiently. And to do it, they need several different things. First off, if you remember all the way back to high school or college biology, there are things called proteins. And proteins are really important because they tell the body what to do. And so in this case, fireflies and their lanterns have special proteins called luciferin. So this is kind of what luciferin looks like. And this is what makes it glow. And it'll glow eventually, it'll just take a long time. And it needs a few other ingredients to happen. And so the first ingredient is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Any ATP ring a bell for people? Yeah, you eat something, your body digests it, turns into sugar, that sugar gets broken into ATP, and ATP is what fuels your body. So breathing uses ATP, moving your finger uses ATP, sitting in my glorious presence uses ATP, all that stuff. Anytime you're using energy, it uses that. And fireflies are somewhat unique in the fact that other biofluorescent creatures don't need ATP for the most part to glow, but fireflies do. Once you have ATP, you need oxygen. And so oxygen's all around us, and oxygen is one of the most destructive elements we have. Think about rust that's caused by oxygen. Oxygen is very oxidative, which means it rips ions off of other things and causes it to break down, so steel turns into rust. If you've ever bitten into an apple and it starts turning brown, that's because oxygen is oxidizing the starch inside the apple and breaking it from starch into sugar. So the browner your apple, the more sugar you have. But that's oxygen doing that. So oxygen can create a lot of energy by doing that. And then another thing that fireflies need is a metal called magnesium. So magnesium is a very highly energetic metal. This is kind of a bright silver. A lot of people use it camping. And the reason why is because it catches on fire really, really easily. So you can kind of go like this. And get some nice sparks. It's okay, they're so small they won't catch anything on fire. Now if I get full one, sure. But no, I promise not to bring your building down. So magnesium has a ton of energy. Somehow it's adding energy to this reaction. So you get another idea of how strong magnesium is. They have made bombs out of magnesium for warfare, and the magnesium burns so hot it sets the atmosphere on fire. It's really hard to set our atmosphere on fire because of magnesium can do that. Magnesium can even burn underwater. So very, very strong chemical there. And all of that stuff together will create a glow, but again, like I said, it's gonna take a while. And fireflies are making their glows within fractions of a second. So they need something to speed it up, and they need what's called a catalyst. Catalyst speeds things up, and so their catalyst is called luciferase. And this is roughly what luciferase looks like. And it's a computer model of it. And basically, it grabs onto the luciferin, the ATP, the oxygen, the magnesium, and it gives it a giant hug, and it squeezes it together, and it speeds it up. And so to give you an idea of just how catalysts work, brought a different kind of a catalyst as an example. So, you've all used hydrogen peroxide before, right? It's
Yep.
H2O2, which means it's water with an extra oxygen on it. I promise this won't burn down your building either.
I'm just wondering if the laptop might.
I'm gonna move away from the laptop
Okay.
before we,
Don't worry.
I do this in my hand because it's hot.
I'm just amused at the pun about luciferous being the light bringer.
Where do you think you got that name from?
Well.
Yep, the Latin roots. I took Latin in high school thinking it would help me so much with biology and Latin names. Turns out all the scientific names are Latinized Greek, so I took the wrong language. But yes, a lot of those roots are there, and it comes from the same root, like bringer. So this is hydrogen peroxide. It wants to become water and oxygen. Right now it's water with an extra oxygen. It's very unstable, and so if I left this overnight, the oxygen would leave, and we just have water left behind. It happens naturally, but again, it's gonna take all night for it to do that. So we can speed it up with a catalyst. And the catalyst I'm gonna use today is called manganese dioxide. And it's gonna speed this reaction up, so I'm gonna pour it in. Yeah, manganese, a little different. I wish it was magnesium, because that would really, it would have worked really great kind of that didn't do, but you pour it in, you give it a shake. You see how it starts bubbling almost instantly?
Yeah.
That, and can you hear the hissing?
Might wanna.
Yep, let me see if we can get over here. It's almost at the point where it's boiling now. And pretty soon we're actually gonna see oxygen pouring out of here. It's ripping off the oxygen from that water so quick, that extra oxygen, that this has actually gone from about 70 degrees to about 150 degrees.
Wow, really?
It's kind of, that's why I wear a glove, boiling right now, and you can see it steaming up as oxygen started to just kind of pull off of it. We couldn't see that happening before, but now we can. Catalysts speed things up really, really fast. And that's what this luciferase does. It speeds up the process really, really fast, so fireflies can flash within microseconds of when they want to.
They have control
They have control
of start and stop.
of start and stop, and they stop it by adding something called nitrous oxide into their lanterns, and that cuts off the oxygen, and that makes the process stop.
Could blow up a balloon.
You could. It was fun for a while, but you could. Yes,
With balloon.
yes. There's, with chemistry, all things are possible.
And then you could use that oxygen.
Okay.
So, we can probably go back to the PowerPoint now, but I love that, I just love the science behind it. What I also like is there's still things we're figuring out. Like why exactly magnesium is in there. We know it speaks of somehow, how we're not entirely sure. So there's still more to learn, which can be really fun.
And next we go over the Krebs cycle.
Exactly. Who doesn't love the Krebs cycle?
All the OChem students who are watching this, if there are any, just immediately shiver in terror.
That was the nice thing about my majors. I didn't have to do OChem. My wife had to do OChem. I had to help her study, but I didn't.
Is this the,
Safe.
is this the only species that uses this way to make light? Or I guess the reverse question, how many species?
How many species? So all fireflies use this mechanism. There is a related beetle that isn't in the Lampridae family, but is really close related that also uses it. Other biofluorescent creatures, they use something slightly different, because they don't need ATP like fireflies do. That being said, we can inject other species of beetles with the luciferase, I think it's the enzyme, it might be the protein, and they'll glow. So there's some similar chemicals in them that will allow it to happen if they have the right protein and enzyme.
So, with those other ones, with this, so sorry,
No, sorry?
would it be like parallel or convergent evolution or what, like,
I was.
did they arrive at the same thing or did they come from this?
Same common ancestor.
Okay.
I would say they had the same common ancestor at some point, and there's a lot of evidence that flashing didn't evolve to find a mate. Fireflies repurposed it for that. Flashing evolved to say we're poisonous. And so because of that, that means that this ability was around before there were fireflies. So somewhere when that close cousin and fireflies branched off, their common ancestor had luciferase to it. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. So not convergent evolution, because they were related at some point. They still kind of are.
We're getting into statistics too.
I know, I love statistics as well. It's a fascinating.
Just friends who rambles about it to me.
You know, that's why I love teaching adults, because I can get into the various stuff. Sometimes they're teaching this to a 6-year-old, they don't care about statistics. It makes me sad sometimes. So as to why they glow, again, they're adults for the most part are glowing to find a mate. And they do different colors and they do different patterns based on the species to make sure they're actually finding the right mate. And so something that is interesting about this chart right here, you can see the male flash patterns in seconds. So this top one, it flashes, and then in 3 seconds it flashes, and 3 seconds it flashes. That's how this female right here can tell between the one that flashes at 0 and the one that flashes at 6. It's a different flashing pattern between species. And the females have their own flashing pattern. What this can't quite show, the reason this line's so small here is because her flash is less than a second. And so the length of the flashing was put out to tell the male what species is flashing at, as well as the pattern. And these are all in the Photinus group, it's called. If we go into the Photinus group, the patterns would be different, but they would also vary by the time they take.
It's an identification feature.
It is, and you can use scientists actually use high speed cameras to identify them. That's how they do species surveys. Now, another reason again that they flash is say we're poisonous. So if a bat flies in, they might flash extra. When they're younger, when they're not adults, they flash, say they're poisonous. If something eats them, they've got something called a bufotoxin, same kind of toxin the toads have, that's why it's called that. That makes it taste really bad and even makes them sick. And some species can even force blood out of their exoskeleton to make the creatures kind of taste that first. It's called reflex bleeding. Now, again, how they do it, it's not just a matter of the time that they're flashing, it's also the shapes they make. And so if you look at this picture on the right, the top one, Photinus pyralis, this is one of our most common fireflies. If you've seen fireflies, you've probably seen it. Its other name is the Big Dipper because it makes J's. It kind of dips down and up, down and up. Compare that to Photinus marginalis. I can never pronounce Latin, even though I took it. It's a relatively just steady flash. The male itself is going up and down, but it always flashes at the same point and it's waved at the same. So color, time, and pattern, and shape of the flash is all how they're kind of differentiating themselves.
You know, I went to the Firefly Presentation here.
Yeah.
And I saw one particular firefly that was like on his way, like to the group.
Mm-hmm.
And he was flashing super fast, and I just thought that he was excited.
He
He
was
was like, I'm there, you guys wait for me.
Right. It probably was really exciting. I'm thinking that even a different genus, I'd say that was probably a Photinus, is what we call. Photinus tends to do a faster flashing.
Yeah.
And we can see the difference in the woods when we do our hike. We'll be in the woods where Photinus is mostly, and it's flash, flash, flash. And then we'll go out to the edge of the woods where the prairies where Photinus is, and it becomes flash and flash, flash and flash, flash and flash. And so it's really cool seeing that difference.
Wouldn't it be nice if every species in the world?
Just it's so like a especially bird. Like, come on. Or other beetles. Beetles are actually one of the hardest species to identify because there's more beetles than the other animal in the world. And then for a lot of species, you have to use a microscope and look at the reproductive parts.
Yeah.
And so it can be tough.
They don't flash the Morse code to tell you what they are.
They don't. Now, this is my favorite part of fireflies, because it turns out fireflies lie. I just always find it fascinating when animals try to deceive each other. And unfortunately, scientists had to name these two fireflies very similarly. We have Photinus, which does a single flash, and we have Photinus, which does a double flash. Let me turn this down. Sorry. There we go. And so Photinus is a little bit smaller than Photinus. And Photinus makes its bufotoxins no problem. It's got lots of poison. Unfortunately, Photinus cannot make any bufotoxins. but they are still poisonous. And they're poisonous because they got that poison from their mothers. And so the mothers have to eat a poisonous firefly. They absorb that poison, they put it in their eggs. They get really desperate for this poison sometimes, so they're young and survive. And so what happens is early in the season, everybody's being nice and honest. It's going great. Photinus is flashing a single time. Photurus is doing a double flash. Everybody's going, having a good time. But then, once Photurus female mates, he doesn't need to find another Photurus male. They don't need to mate once. And so then that's when she starts to lie. She starts doing a double flash, and she starts doing a single flash. She copies the flash of Photinus
To
attract that male. And when the Photinus sees that, he's like, whoa! And he flies down, and then he gets eaten. And she absorbs his poison. Now, if he realizes his mistake fast enough, he can't escape. I've actually seen him escape. If he sees it fast enough, they can create this white sticky goo that comes out of their neck. She tends to bite their neck. And that jams up her mandibles for about 10 minutes. She can't eat them, he'll fly away. So I've seen that happen exactly
So
once.
they've been doing this not long enough that he's developed.
Long time, he's
But
developed
that's-
defense.
okay.
Usually she gets them, but sometimes he gets away.
That's crazy.
To make it more complicated, the Photurus males start realizing there's no double flashes happening anymore. All their females are gone. And one of the quirks of insect biology is that the last male to mate with a female gets to be the father of the eggs. And so they want to find the Photurus females, and they genetically know that she started imitating the one that flashes once. So they start flashing once. And then if they get a single flash, they're like, all right, and they fly down, and they're hoping it's this Photurus, but the Photurus female thinks she's just attracted to the Photinus male, which means that the Photurus male that was lying might get eaten. So as soon as he lands, I know, it gets confusing, right? As soon as he lands, he does a double flash, like, oh, I'm just kidding about one of you. And sometimes it gets to mate, and sometimes it gets eaten.
Sounds very Shakespearean.
It is. It's complicated, which is just, to me, really, really fun. So,
Where does it even go from there, you know? What's next?
so then it leads back to our darks. So the Photurus female that's doing on the line is such an aggressive predator. Scientists have seen her flying in the air and snatch males out of the air. Scientists have seen her crawl into spider webs and get in a tug of war with spiders or with fireflies trapped in her spider webs. And one hypothesis for some of these dark fireflies, the ones that don't flash during the day, is that they just never really kind of took to flashing. They maybe just kept their pheromones. But there's a few of these species where they have a flash for a couple of days. And that leads to the thought that these have more poison than our flashing ones do. That means they'd be a better target for Photurus to get as much poison as possible. She probably used to hunt them. And so they would stay up later to avoid her. And so she would stay up later. And then they would stay up even later until they were forced to be up during the day to avoid being predated by Photurus females. Now, during the day, your flash doesn't work very well, so they switched back to their ancient method of finding each other, which is pheromones or smells. So it's this long, drawn-out history that just is really cool, and yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it's happened all over our country.
And you thought Days of Our Lives was a soap opera.
No, you just gotta go watch some Fireflies. Now, as we talked about, they are declining. Unfortunately, overdevelopment and light pollution, especially light pollution, is really awful for them. When everybody has their security lights on, it makes it really hard to find each other flashing. It's one of the most disruptive things we have are lights at night. So the good news about light pollution is the easiest pollution to solve, because as soon as you turn off your light, the pollution's gone. And so one of the things a lot of scientists advocate for who study fireflies is you can still have your lights for security, but get them on motion sensors. Because then it's dark when you don't need it, and the fireflies can be around. And then when you do need it, it turns on automatically, and actually motion sensing lights are better for security anyway, because that kind of shocks people. Habitat loss, again, they don't go back to their habitats if they're disrupted for a long time because they don't travel, so habitat loss can have a huge impact on them. Pesticides, it's one of the leading causes of their decline. And then historically, commercial harvesting. Companies used to pay the kids something like a nickel for every 10 pounds or 100 pounds of fireflies they sent in by mail, because that luciferin is so important. luciferin was originally used to make sure canned food is safe. Because it lights up in the presence of ATP, if it lights up on a canned food during a test, it means there's bacteria in that can that's gonna go wrong. So they use it for food safety. We still do nowadays, and we use an artificial luciferin. It's been used to find cancer or do cancer studies because it'll light up because of all the extra ATP that cancer cells create. So it's used for that. Now we use the artificial version, which helps the fireflies out, but it came from that. And getting back to the stars, NASA has actually put them on sensors with the idea that living things in space will have ATP. And so they've got a little camera that'll watch for a glow, and if it ever glows, it means that that sensor probe in space has found ATP. Maybe it's a living thing like bacteria. As to what we can do, turn off your lights if you're not at night, if you don't need them. Get the lights that are on sensors if you do need them. Something that cities that become really bad, LEDs are very directional and they're so cheap, not only they reduce light pollution, they've actually increased it by a huge amount. They run more towards the blue light spectrum, which is more like daylight, which disrupts our sleeping and fireflies able to see each other. And because they're so cheap, cities actually put in more lights than they used to. So you end up with more light overall. So if you are going to do LEDs, fight the temptation to put in more. And also try to buy more towards the yellow light spectrum. Warmer light is better for fireflies if you have to have a light on at night.
Wondering if there's some kind of a film that can go over, like.
Yeah, blue acetane or whatever, it's like a blue film or red film can work, that disrupts less. The blue film nowadays, it takes away the blue light from coming out. The red film makes it more reddish, and red disrupts night vision less. And so that can be something you put on light bulbs if you already have light bulbs. Is that what you're talking about?
I was thinking about like streetlights, that
Oh.
something like a municipality could do where they could maybe have something that's available that they could just put up over.
I don't know
cover
about
the light.
films, but yeah.
I was gonna say, like, aren't there specific shapes of street lamps that directs the light directly downward, that way it's not going up, which helps.
And that makes a huge difference. Yep, there are covers they'll put in. I've even seen where they start to cover the sides, except for the side they want the light to come out of to reduce as much as possible. If you do that, that works really well, as long as you're not putting in more lights to compensate for it, because then that defeats the purpose.
Sure.
So yeah, it's kind of planning. There's a whole dark sky group in Minnesota. Some friends of mine are scientists that work for them that are very active in it, that have a lot of information about how cities can reduce their night pollution. Because that's a huge thing for stars, human safety, and wildlife. Try not to mow so much. Lawn grass is fireflies' friends, and it's your friends. You don't have to mow. And having sticks or some logs in your yard, those are all places where then the young can live. And so having a messy corner of your yard is what they're starting to call it, is a great way to encourage fireflies. And you can actually certify your property as Firefly Habitat by going to firefly.org/certify. And they will give you a sign and they'll give you a whole PDF specific for your area and how to make your yard or your park firefly friendly. Some of our references from today. And then for more information, you can go check out episodes 54 to 56 from the Wandering Naturalist podcast, the QR code links there. Or you can go to threeriversparks.link/podcast and it'll take you to the appropriate app on your device. And again, there's some amazing scientists on that podcast who specialize in fireflies. And then this is my information if people want to have any follow-up questions.